The Bad Boys podcast is brought to you by Iconic Motor House, the guys making your motoring fantasies a reality. Visit iconicmotorhouse.com. Today on the show, we chat with documentary filmmaker Topher Field about his new movie, Battlefield Melbourne.
We also chat about Victoria's nearly 2-year lockdown
and the heavy-handedness of the Victorian police squad thugs.
All that and more on the Bad Boys podcast. If you want the hard-hitting journalism of Four Corners, the reliable current affairs of, well, a current affair, and the planning that goes into classy shows like The Project, then you've tuned into the wrong podcast. It's comedy, entertainment, celebrity interviews, and news stories that makes Fox News sound like an episode of The Muppets. Or maybe it's the other way around. Conversations no one wants to have, but everyone wants to hear. This is the Bad Boys Podcast. Welcome to the Bad Boys Podcast, and a very interesting episode today. We have a very special guest, Topher Field. Andrew reached out and said, come on the show, have a chat with us.
Yeah, look, I am so excited that he's coming on the show. I've been wanting to talk to this guy for some time. I even bought the T-shirts. Loved the documentary that he did about effectively the Victorian government using the police force as their own thug squad. And anybody who hasn't seen it, go out and see it. Battleground Melbourne. It is a must watch. But I have some questions for Topher Field. I just want to really get into the weeds of it a little bit because, it stirred up a lot for me.
And I think in the vein of Joe Rogan, let's just put a little disclaimer at the start of this episode that, this guy is going to touch on a few things that you may not want to hear, you may want to hear. But at the end of the day, Bad Boys has always been about presenting different sides of arguments. So we're not here to say you have to believe one thing, you have to believe another. We have our own views on things, and today we are presenting a view from Topher Field, who I think has actually created a movie with a very valid argument.
I completely agree, mate. Look, I really do. Anybody who's been listening to the show knows my views. They know that I'm pretty grumpy about all of this that's been going on, and I have been for years. But I'll always respect everybody else and their views.
Yeah.
Anybody who knows me knows that I always respect, even if I don't agree with your viewpoint, even if I don't understand it, but I will always respect your right to have it. So, look, I wanted to get this guy on the show. I want us to have an adult discussion about all of this because, to be quite honest with you, I actually really genuinely believe in my heart of hearts that it needs to be heard.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we're so often presented by one side of the argument from the media, and it's time that another side of the argument actually was presented in a what I would say a very reasonable and intellectual discussion. So this is going to go a little bit deeper than a lot of our other shows probably do, simply because someone that's smarter than us is actually coming on the show.
Yeah, hey, look, that always helps, doesn't it? I was about to say, the word intellectual discussion in our show has probably never been muttered before and will probably go down in history as never to be muttered again.
Probably.
But this is a serious subject, and it's really important that it is heard and felt, I think, by everybody listening.
Yeah, and most importantly, if you have been through the nearly 2-year lockdown in Victoria and you have gone through some pretty hard times, please go and speak to someone if you've got any sort of tendencies towards self-harm. We don't want that at all. So we're massive advocates for mental health, and we would ask that you go and see someone to like Headspace, to go out and just talk to them.
Lifeline's another one.
Lifeline as well. Yeah. We will be back with The Bad Boys and Topher Field right after this.
You ever been cruising down the main street with your mates only to be laughed at by the gorgeous girls passing you by? Well, maybe you need to get your own ride and leave your mum's Camry at home. Turning your cruising dreams into a reality has never been easier than it is now with Iconic Motorhouse. Regular draws, limited numbers and access to special and unique deals from over 4,500 popular brands. They don't do Camrys, they only give away real men's cars, eye-catching cars that'll get them purring like a pussycat. So don't be a turkey. Go to iconicmotorhouse.com, choose how many tickets you want, and for a limited time, they'll increase your odds. It's never been easier to win a customised showpiece that will get their attention. iconicmotorhouse.com, giving you the opportunity to fulfill your motoring fantasy.
If you like your nuts being gently cupped by an angel, then Man Up Down Under are the duds for you. Environmentally friendly with bamboo inserts that are soft, strong, and lifts your weight with ease. Longer in the legs so they stay put. They're cool in summer and warmer when it matters. Man Up Down Under, underwear your girl will want to see you in and that you won't want to take off. Go to manupdownunder.com.au and buy a week's supply for your package because your junk deserves the very best. This is the Bad Boys Podcast. In 2021, Melbourne went from the title of the most livable city in the world to the most lockdown city in history. The rest of the nation, including the Prime Minister, stood by and watched the Victorian Premier shut down Melbourne, and while many complied, there were many who didn't. Documentary filmmaker Topher Field was there, and he captured the whole thing through the eyes of the freedom fighters who stood against Dan Andrews. We're very excited to have him join the Bad Boys today. Topher Field, how are you?
I'm doing very well, and thank you very much for having me. I do appreciate it.
No, our
You're
pleasure.
very welcome,
our
mate.
Pleasure.
Look, I heard about this documentary that you'd done called Battleground Melbourne, and I watched the raw release. Literally the night that it came out. I was so excited to be viewing this because I'd been watching everything going on in Melbourne. I'm in New South Wales, but I'd been watching Melbourne very, very closely because anybody who knows me, Shane will be able to tell you this probably, I have an issue with injustice. Mm-hmm. It's one of those bruises. What do they call it? One of the 5 bruises that just rings true to me all the time. Yeah. And I've got to put it on the table. I've had a really big issue with police lately. Not personally, not as in my own personal interactions, but more to me when police start arresting grandmothers on park benches for sitting and chatting, when they start firing at protesters when they're exercising their constitutional right. People think we've got a constitutional right to free speech in this country. We don't. But we do have a constitutional right to protest. When they start firing on them with rubber bullets, when they start wholesale pepper spraying them and stuff like that, all because these people dare have an alternative opinion, I start losing my shit.
Yeah.
So
join the club. Join the club, mate.
And I thought I was informed. I'd been watching this whole Victorian fuck show for so long, and then I watched your Battleground Melbourne, and oh my God, I didn't even know half of it.
Yeah. And to be fair, that's not your fault. People in Victoria have forgotten half of it. We're talking about 2 years of history, which for most of us, because we have been such a lucky country, most of us haven't really seen genuine hardship. And no disrespect to the few that have, but by far the majority never have. Right. And so when you suddenly get thrown into the last 2 years, it's very difficult to stay on top of it mentally. And even a lot of Victorians have forgotten. They don't actually remember. And I've had so many people who were there, who lived through this, get in touch with me and say, wow, watching it all laid out like that from start to finish, there was so much that I'd forgotten. But it needs to be told. It needs to be remembered. And that's what I'm hoping Battleground Melbourne will do.
And, just to set the scene in this as well, we're not talking about a vax, anti-vax argument here. We are talking about our God-given right to freedom, right? And how that was taken away from everyone in Melbourne.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I think is a common misconception is that people assume that everyone going to the protests is an anti-vaxxer or at the very least has not had the COVID vaccine. Neither of those things is true. I've had more jabs than I can care to remember. I was in the Army Reserves for a couple of years. They jab you with everything under the sun, right? But when it comes to my issue with the COVID vaccines isn't so much the vaccines themselves, although, they're still in the experimental phase. They have not been approved for general use yet. And I'm not an early adopter of anything. I'm not an early adopter of smartphones. I'm not an early adopter of cryptocurrency. And I'm not an early adopter of injections into my arm either, right? So I'm going to wait. Thank you very much. That's my position there. But the minute it is made mandatory and the government says we have the authority to micromanage your body and make you put in something that can never be taken out because we say so. At that moment, it's no longer relevant whether it's safe or whether it's effective. It's actually not about the vaccine at all. It's about whether you agree that the government can have that amount of power. This could be the safest vaccine ever invented. It could have a perfect safety record and a perfect efficacy record, and I would still have an issue with it because this is about whether I own my body or whether the government owns my body.
You're right. It isn't an anti-vax thing at all. It's about free choice of what we put into our bodies.
It's about power.
I agree with.
It's about whether we have the power over our bodies to make our own choices or whether the government has that power over us. That's what this is about. The vaccine is just the prop. It's just the scene of the battle. But the battle is about so much more.
And I think part of the big issue, and look, the thing I've personally been grappling with, and look, everybody knows my thoughts on this as well. I'm fully vaxxed. I've had every properly developed, every properly tested, and every properly released vaccine there is. I haven't had flu shots in the past, and there's a very simple reason why. I actually have never needed to. I haven't had the flu or a cold for over 5 years. I haven't had a sniffle. But I've also worked in government for 25 years. There's also a reason why I opted out of the e-health record, because I know for a fact no government, Australian federal or Australian state government, can protect your data. They don't have the resources, they don't have the knowledge, and they don't have the expertise to do it. They just can't. So this whole thing is a madness to me, and the thing I've been grappling with, and the question I still can't get answered, is what the fuck's going on? Well,
I think that question's been going through a lot of people's minds over the last 2 years. And a lot of people have very understandably turned to conspiracy theories for an explanation. Now, my stance on conspiracy theories is I'm generally quite standoffish. I'm not quick to jump into any conspiracy theories. And in fact, I've actually been wrong more often by rejecting conspiracy theories than I have by actually accepting them. So, for example, when the conspiracy theory came out saying that the vaccine was actually made in a lab, I rejected that. Now we know that was 99.99% certain to have been true, right? And I was wrong rejecting it. When people first came out saying no to the mandatory vaccination, which was, of course, people started saying that before the vaccines had even been officially developed. They were just in development, and people were already showing up to protest, holding signs saying no mandatory vaccinations. I rolled my eyes and went, oh, God, there goes our credibility. They were right. Okay, so I'm actually potentially too far that way, right? But having said that, I can understand why some people go to the extreme of every single conspiracy theory that they've ever heard of. They just automatically believe, because you do go looking for an explanation. Why? What's going on? Why are people behaving this way? And I want to propose an alternative theory. So the prevailing theory amongst conspiracy theorists is that there is a cabal of people that are running the world like puppet masters with all of the politicians on a string, etc. Okay, let me propose an alternative hypothesis to that one. And that is that what we're seeing are the effects of perverse incentives and the hubris that comes with being a politician and wanting to have that much power. So it works like this. The media get wind of something that's going to sell newspapers and help to attract eyeballs. And in this case, it's a virus in Wuhan. Okay, great. So they start pushing it hard because they want the eyeballs and the ad revenue that come along with that. So then the politicians are faced with the problem because the public is getting scared by the media that wants eyeballs and is doing it for selfish financial reasons. But now they want answers, and they're asking the politicians, what are you going to do? Do something. And this is where the perverse incentive kicks in. it is not in a politician's interest to reply and say, you know what, we just need to give this a couple of weeks, see what data comes in, let this play out a little bit. Maybe this is overblown. Maybe we're overreacting. That is not in their political interest at all, because the opposition gets a free kick. They can say, well, if we were in power, we would be doing this and this and this, and why aren't you doing that, etc. Right? They're giving the opposition a free kick. But conversely, there is no downside to doing something, even if the something that they do turns out to be the wrong thing. If they do something and then the fear proves to be overblown and the problem goes away, they get to claim credit and say, hey, isn't it good that we did that thing? Because, now the problem's gone. Yay for us. If the problem turns out to be really serious and bad, they can say, well, imagine how bad it would have been if we hadn't done something.
Yeah.
Right. So the political incentive, the perverse incentive is there for them to do something, even if it doesn't help, even if the something is useless. And this is where the second layer kicks in. None of them want to be seen to be doing less than the jurisdiction next door. Queensland didn't want to be outdone by Victoria. New Zealand doesn't want to be outdone by Queensland. It's all throughout Europe, all throughout Australia, we saw leaders trying to one-up each other and trying to do more than each other. And Dominic Perrottet, to his credit, was one of the few that actually turned around and said, hey, guys, I'm going to do less. Right. And he copped it for a while. Now, he wasn't great. Okay. But he did do less.
And came in very late in the program as well.
Came in very late in the program, caved to pressure in a lot of different ways. But nevertheless, he tried to do less. What did he get? He got absolutely castigated in the media. The opposition were at his throat for a little while, and he had to ride that out. Most politicians don't have the guts to do that.
No.
And so the incentive for them is do something. And in choosing what that something is, you don't have to worry about whether the something works or not. You've just got to make sure you're doing everything that your neighbor is doing and then more on top. So, and that to me explains why we've seen all these governments acting in concert, implementing similar programs and similar rules, etc., without the need for a puppet master that has them all under control.
Okay, but the one thing I don't understand, right, and this is where I think we get to this whole Battleground Melbourne conversation, is if someone said to you, I'm going to lock you. If the government said to you, I'm going to lock you in your house and you're not going to leave for 2 years and you'll never go out. You go out for various times, but when you do go out, you're going to have to be muzzled. Right now, if someone said that right from the get-go, you'd be like, no fucking way, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
But they started to set a scene, and it's like that frog on a hot plate. By the time the hot plate is really hot, it's too late to move, right?
Yeah, 100%. And we see that, the documentary lays that out really clearly. We started with this 14 days to flatten the curve, and then it became just a little bit longer, and then it became, look, we're just trying to get to COVID zero, and then it became, well, now that we've reached COVID zero, what next? Are we just stuck here forever? And they never had an exit plan, and this is something that I was saying at the time in March and April of 2020. I was saying to anyone that would listen, they don't have an exit plan. And until their strategy has an exit plan attached to it, it's not a strategy, it's a coping mechanism. They're just fumbling their way through.
Right.
And the problem with something like a lockdown and the problem with something like COVID zero, where there's going to be no infections, is that it doesn't help get you through a pandemic. Understand, viruses, pandemics happen, and they are actually unstoppable. People don't want to hear this, but I'm going to say it again. Pandemics and viruses are unfucking stoppable. Okay? They will get here sooner or later, and lots of people will get sick sooner or later. They are delayable, and that's what we did. We successfully delayed it. And people made the mistake of pointing to the fatality rates and pointing to the infection rates and saying, see, it's working. Compared to other parts of the world. What they weren't factoring in is that we were not getting any closer to being through the pandemic. We weren't getting through the pandemic. We were now stuck in it.
So this is another interesting thing, and I agree with everything you've said, but I want to talk about fatality rates here. Australian Bureau of Statistics had a study come out, and in that study it clearly said that in Australia we had 2,639 fatalities with COVID, right? Now the fascinating thing was, they were people that died that had COVID. And anybody who went into hospital and caught COVID in hospital, so they didn't go to hospital because of COVID, because they were sick with COVID. They went into hospital with kidney disease, with heart problems, with a broken leg, car accidents, all this sort of stuff. And then they died and they had COVID. They were listed as a death. We actually only had 211 deaths as a result of COVID.
But even more than that, that 2,000, right, that you mentioned, that is minimal. Even if they were because of COVID, that is minimal in comparison to everything else.
It's comparable to an ordinary flu year.
Yes.
That's actually comparable. Now,
in fact, the statistics are a little bit better than a normal flu year.
But here's the comeback, okay? Because I say the same things, and here's people always come back to me and say, yes, but if we hadn't locked down, it would have been so much worse. Okay. I want to take you back to, I believe it was October of 2020. I released a video where I dove deeply into the statistics of the infection fatality rate based on the data out of Sweden. Now, Sweden, of course, famously didn't institute top-down controls. The people of Sweden did voluntarily do some things. There was some distancing, there was some voluntary mask wearing and other things like that, but there was no government program forcing people to do this. So their data becomes a pretty good simile for what would happen in a place like Australia if the government hadn't been ramming it down our throats and making all of these rules. What I found, based on the infection fatality rates there, and the infection fatality rate is now accepted to be lower than what was shown in that data. So I'll put that caveat on there. Yeah. This is actually far worse than the reality would have been. It's just the best data that we had at the time.
Right.
If we did nothing and half of Victoria's population got sick, the data showed, because it broke it up into age group and whether or not they had comorbidities, the data showed that in excess of 25,000 Victorians would die with COVID. We now know that the deaths in that data are with COVID deaths, not of COVID deaths. But at the time, they were thought to be of COVID deaths. Okay. Yeah. So what I did then was I shifted the demographic of who got sick. I didn't change the number of people that got sick. What I did was assume that people had taken my advice from a video that I released on the 31st of March, 2020, where I volunteered to be infected with the coronavirus. Yep. And people said it was a publicity stunt. I'm just some attention whore, dancing on the graves of grandma, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. No, there's actually a strategy here. If we protect the elderly and the vulnerable that want protection, because some of them don't, right? But we give people that option. If you're elderly, if you're vulnerable with a comorbidity of some sort, we will support you to be able to self-isolate at home, etc. And this is the kicker, this is the key, the rest of us get on with life and get sick with COVID. Yeah. Because that's how you build herd immunity. If we successfully protected all the vulnerable, the same number of people got sick, but not the vulnerable and not those with comorbidities. Have a guess what the total number of fatalities, based on the data out of Sweden, which showed a much higher fatality rate than what we now know to be true. Have a guess what that number would have been.
I don't know, 10%?
So you're a couple of hundred, you reckon?
Probably, I'm thinking 250, 300. Yep.
You're going to say a lot less.
If my memory serves me correctly, it was either 26 or 28.
Wow.
Far out.
Wow.
And that was based on data. That was all of the deaths with, not deaths of.
Right.
And even after that, we still know that it's an overestimate of the infection fatality rate. Okay. Wow. So a grand total, given that about 96 or 95% of the Australian fatalities have been deaths with and not deaths of, that we can cut that 26 or 28 down to maybe 2 people. Maybe only 1.
See, wouldn't it have been better to put all of our money and all of our time and all of our effort into helping those with mental illness that may be on suicide watch?
Right.
I mean,
see, that's what I was going to get to right now. We had 211 ABS statistics, 211 people that died with COVID. Sorry, of COVID. Thank you. Of COVID. How many people died of suicide as a result of all of the lockdown measures that were put in place? I'm telling you right now, the figure's way higher than 211.
But this is where I start to get really angry, because politicians are so willing to be so incredibly cynical. We started asking that question here in Victoria in 2020 and early 2021. And we got assured by a straight-faced Premier Daniel Andrews that there was no change in the data. Now, that contradicted what we were being told by mortuary owners and morgue workers who were saying they'd never seen it like this before.
Yeah.
Now, what Daniel Andrews didn't want to admit is that it takes up to 2 years for the coroner to rule a suicide a suicide. Mm. So the people that were ending their lives in late 2020 as a result of the lockdowns aren't going to show up in the data, many of them, for as much as 2 years. The end of this year is when they're going to start to show up in the data.
Wow.
Because it's only in extremely obvious cases that the coroner rules it quickly. If there's anything that needs to be investigated for any reason, because if I wanted to kill somebody, and I don't, but if I did, making it look like a suicide is a pretty good way to cover my tracks, right?
Yep.
So they want to look into it. They want to look into it pretty deeply, and they do. And that takes time. But for Daniel Andrews to turn around and with a straight face and say, oh, no, but we're not seeing it in the data yet, when he knows very fucking well why we're not seeing it in the data yet, was one of them. I mean, he did a lot of despicable things, but that would be right up there as the most despicable thing that he did in the entire 2 years.
Yeah, look, I agree. Yeah. So, okay, let's get back to the police.
Sure.
Battleground Melbourne, they showed some pretty horrendous stuff. And look, I know people go turn around and go, well, people were protesting and they were antagonising the police and stuff like that. You know, I was 17. I wanted to be a copper in New South Wales. I sat down with a mate's father who was in some secret squirrel arm of the AFP, narcotics or something. And I sat down with him and I said, look, I want to be a copper. You know, I was trying to be a real man about it. And he said to me, he said, Andrew, what are you going to do when the first 15-year-old comes up and gives you a stack of lip, tells you to fuck off and all the rest of it? I said, well, I'm going to throttle him. He goes, well, there you go.
Can't.
You're not ready to be a copper.
Yeah.
Now, this is a funny thing. Everybody turns around and goes, police were being antagonised, police were, being attacked and all that sort of stuff. With all due respect, if police can't do their job without shooting people, if police can't do their job without wholesale pepper spray, like literally they were corralling human beings into a group and wholesale pepper spraying them from a ridgeline above them.
Yeah, I was there. That day.
Right.
So tell us from the ground, to right there on the ground, what actually happened? What did you see?
Okay, so I need to go back to the start of that day. So we'd seen escalating police violence with previous protests, and what the organisers were doing was they were changing tactics each protest to try and keep the police off balance. And what was happening was we kept on having successful protests where we would get a few thousand people, anywhere 2,000, 5,000 people together in one spot. And the police and the Premier kept on coming out saying, well, that's not going to happen again. We're going to escalate and we're going to do more and they're never going to be able to have another protest. And then the organisers would change tactics and be really clever and they'd have another successful protest. By this point in time, we knew the police were going to start getting vicious because police command were embarrassed. We'd humiliated them 3 or 4 protests in a row. So the word goes out, and I've got people from inside VicPol who feed me information and various other things like that. The word had gone out that they had brought in 2,000 Victoria police officers to work the protest that day.
Where did they bring them in from?
So they were bringing them in from country police stations. They were bringing them across from other departments that had their own specialties, such as the highway patrol, etc. Uniformed detectives were being made to put on beat cop uniforms and come and walk the streets. Leave was being cancelled, etc., right? So they had 2,000 police ready for us that day, and there was promise after promise that they were going to absolutely kick our heads in. They had new weapons, they had new tactics. All of the riot squad were going to be out in force. And the other thing as well. So and we were told very, very clearly, you were going to be arrested. You were going to be attacked, basically, by the police. They shut down public transport. They had checkpoints on highways, etc. So what did the organisers do? They announced a location that was just outside of all the checkpoints. So all the checkpoints were in a big ring around the city. An hour before the protest, they announced a location that was just outside of that ring of checkpoints. And so we were able to gather and form a critical mass there. Unbeknownst to me at the time, there was a second group that formed somewhere else, and they were trying to link up with us. They were watching our live streams and stuff and trying to get to us, but they never did. They kept on being cut off by the police. That was actually a really good thing in the end, because the police never brought all of their resources to bear on just one group, thanks to that second group being there. So we then started marching away from the police blockades. Right? Now, the theme of this day was this. We were continuously trying to avoid confrontation, and they were continuously chasing us and trying to create a confrontation. That's the reality on the ground from the day. We started marching away from the cops. We're marching along, going down different streets. They formed a blockade in front of us. They had police walking along behind us. They formed a blockade in front of us, and they trapped us in a particular street. And they had, there's video footage, hundreds upon hundreds of cops in row after row, armed to let's not forget they carry lethal weapons. They're carrying every single one of them is armed with lethal force. Plus they have their batons. They have many of them had their riot shields. They've got their pepper spray. They've got their tear gas canisters, and they've got their rubber bullets, etc. Right? These people came for a fight. We're not wearing body armor. No. We're holding placards and we're chanting. We did not come for a fight. We walked away from them. They got in our way and trapped us to create a fight. Now, what happened the first time they caught us was actually they had us trapped on a street with no side streets, and all the buildings actually blocked our way through. But there was one that was a little bit of an apartment complex sort of thing, and it had a gate, and they opened the gate and were able to go through, and then it backed onto another street on the other side. And so everyone was able to flood out that way. And the police got angry and they grabbed the last few people, and they were pretty vicious in how they treated those people. But by and large, most of the crowd got away. We then marched again away from the cops because we didn't want a confrontation, and we ended up marching through. Sorry,
I was about to say, and that's obvious in the documentary as well. You can see people literally going, "All right, let's walk away.
Let's go this way." Correct. That's exactly what it was. And we ended up at a ravine. There's not many of those in Melbourne, but there is one, and we ended up having to walk through it just because of how things had worked out as we were playing dodge and cops. And we walked into it, and it has a bit of a crest in the middle, and you can't see the end of it as you enter. And as we come over that crest, you could see the police were waiting for us at the bottom. And behind us was another row of police that had been walking along behind us. And what happened was we stopped there, and people then immediately did what we've always done. They sat down. They tried to create a non-confrontational atmosphere. They were deliberately non-aggressive, and the police began to move forward, began to raise their batons, threatening. They began pepper spraying people and forcing people to move. Well, of course, the crowd gets angry at that point. So then bottles start being thrown and these sorts of things. When people talk about, but they were antagonizing the cops, almost without exception, there are a few idiots out there that have done some really dumb things, but almost without exception, the bottle throwing, etc., starts after the pepper spraying.
Right.
When they start moving on us, they get the reaction that they're looking for. Because remember, they're the ones that came for a fight. They're the ones that came equipped for a fight. Now they just want the optics for the cameras so that it looks like they didn't start the fight. That's the last thing they need. And then they can fuck everybody up as much as they want, and the media is going to be on their side, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the play. So what happened then was a couple of the bigger guys in the group, they'd had enough. They were done. We'd marched kilometre after kilometre away from the cops, and they'd chased us and created a confrontation. So they turned around, so going back the way we came, so those cops that had been behind us, and they just linked arms and barged their way through what was a fairly thin police line at that point, because they hadn't had time to move the extra resources in. Now, regrettably, some of those police officers were knocked over and some of them were injured. I found out later from a police officer that gives me information that many of them were actually quite new and fresh out of the academy, and most of them have actually since quit the police.
Right.
They've actually gone, if this is what this is about, if this is what I'm expected to do, and just go into all-in brawls with the public, then this is not what I signed up for. So, and I think that's fair enough. So I regret the confrontation. I regret the injury. But as I say in the documentary, if you are going to chase the people of Melbourne and start a fight with them, you don't get to whinge when you lose.
Right.
Right? They came armed and looking for a fight. We were unarmed and not looking for a fight, and we still beat their asses anyway.
Right. And look, again, coming back to the footage that we saw, two little old grandmas sitting on a park bench doing nothing, literally minding their own business. People were allowed to exercise. These were two old ladies. They'd gone out for a walk and then they needed to sit down and recover.
Yeah.
And what was it, 5 or 6 armed policemen?
And let's just take a step back even from that, because, I mean, that's a particularly extreme example. But when you're given an order as a police officer that says you have to lock people in their homes, these aren't criminals. There's no order from a judge. There's no warrant. There's no nothing. It's your job to keep people locked in their homes. Why didn't more police officers at that point turn around to their boss and say, oh, looks like I'm going to be calling in sick quite a lot in the near future,
or
mate?
where's the lawful instruction?
Yeah.
Like, you know, they have to follow lawful instructions, but how is that lawful when there's no actual law to back it up in some cases? They put the laws in later.
In Victoria Police, they can take as many mental health days as they decide that they want. There is no limit, and they cannot be punished for taking mental health days. Wow. I think one of the absolute disgraces, and there are certainly exceptions to this, but one of the most disgraceful things is how many police officers continued to show up for their shifts knowing what it was that they were going to be ordered to do, and having an easy out, to stay home and not become a brown shirt, not become a head kicker for the closest thing to a fascist that this country has ever seen in Daniel Andrews. Instead, they chose to show up to work and kick heads on his behalf. And I think that's a disgrace.
Do you feel that, and this might be a bit touchy, but when people like that, or the soldiers, and you've been a soldier yourself, right? When you're put into a position,
only in the reserves, but yeah.
But when soldiers are put into a position where they're surrounded by this day in, day out, that it almost becomes a bit of a blur to them, and that they're not really thinking straight?
Yeah. So the example that I think is easiest for people to grasp is people with decades of experience in nursing, or as surgeons or as doctors, etc. They can end up with something known as compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
Where they meet somebody who's in excruciating pain and needs some comfort and needs someone to take a bit of a tender touch, and they're just looking at it going, well, you're the 10,000th person that I've seen in pain in my life, and I no longer feel the compassion that I used to feel. And so they don't treat these people as human beings. They don't treat them the way that you or I would if we stumbled on someone in that level of pain on the street. Or if someone knocked on our door desperately in need of help, we would instinctively react with a certain level of compassion. And they used to, but they lost it through compassion fatigue. And I think the same thing happens a lot with police. And in fact, I would argue that their training environment is designed to induce a certain amount of compassion fatigue is the wrong word in the case of the police, but not
it's almost
caring
like
about
violence
the individual.
fatigue, isn't it? It's almost,
not caring about the individual, not caring about the individual outcomes, just caring about whether or not they have done their job and whether or not they're going to get in trouble. Did I follow my orders? Did I cover my ass? Yes, I did. Therefore, I'm all good. If I'm nice to that person, I'll actually be breaking my orders, and therefore I better not be nice to that person, even though my human instinct tells me that that would be the right thing to do under these circumstances.
So you know who else had that issue? Thousands of German Stasi.
I was just going to say. I was just going to say that.
I'm just doing my job, mate. No, I'm innocent, boy. I'm just doing my job as they're clubbing and killing people.
But see, in that instance, they're following orders. The orders that they have been told are the right thing, right? And so they are just doing their job, and that's their defense. I was just doing my job. I've become desensitized to it.
So I've had some very, shall we say, robust conversations with people who are police officers and work for the government in various capacities. And I've told some of these people to their faces that they would have stood on the guard towers at Auschwitz.
Yeah.
Right? You would have stood on the guard towers at Auschwitz, and then you would have gone to church on Sunday and sang songs and said prayers and gone home and eaten a roast and made love to your wife and slept like a baby because you're convinced that you're the good guy. While you stand on the towers at Auschwitz and watch what goes on inside those walls. We have those people walking among us. That's a slightly terrifying thought. But also people get upset when you make the Nazi analogy, right? People go, no, you can't make that comparison. That's disrespectful, etc. Okay, well, hang on. I'm not comparing what Victoria Police did to Germany in 1943, 44, 45. Right? What I am saying is, though, Daniel Andrews and the police under Daniel Andrews are comparable to Germany in 1933, the Enabling Act. The burning of the Reichstag and all of the concentration of power. Daniel Andrews' permanent pandemic bill has more than a passing resemblance to the Enabling Act of 1933.
It does, you're right. Yes.
He has given himself now the power to imprison people without charge, without even having to say what crime they committed, for 2 years. And there is not a single Victorian court that can say a damn thing about it. And he can't be sued afterwards. Now, I think if it went to the High Court, that would be a very different story. But he's written the legislation specifically so that you can't go to a Victorian court and have them actually do any kind of review or oversight over what he does. These are powers that have absolutely no place in a democracy. And I think it is absolutely fair and reasonable to compare what Daniel Andrews has become to what Hitler became in 1933. And let's not forget, 1936, Hitler had the Games, the Olympic Games, massive public relations success. Everybody loved him. Let's not forget eugenics, the underlying philosophy that Hitler operated by, was immensely popular in the UK, in the US, in Australia. There were literally eugenic societies where they got together and talked about the superiority of one race over another race. Hitler was not an outlier.
No.
He was just the ultimate expression of a very fashionable, very popular ideology. He was Times Man of the Year in 1938.
Right.
He was at the height of his popularity. Austria voted to become German and come under Hitler's command. I believe it was 97% of the votes were in favor of Hitler, and I do not believe that was a rigged election either. Right? That's who he was. And then in 1939, he invaded Poland, and ultimately in 1943, he came up with the final solution, and we saw the full expression of his horror.
Right.
But for the first 7 years of his reign, he was the golden child. And I can tell you right now, Daniel Andrews would win an election if it was held in Victoria right now. because for a majority of Victorians, he is still the golden child.
Even after being locked away for 2 years.
Okay, let me bore you to tears. I know you said half an hour, but
it's all good, mate. Let's keep going. Yep.
Let me bore you to tears with something here, because I think this is really important, and a lot of people have a light bulb moment when they start to understand this. Are you familiar from high school or uni or whatever with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yes.
It's this triangle. At the bottom, you've got your most basic survival needs: oxygen, shelter, water, etc. At the top, you've got like the pinnacle of human existence. Self-actualization is what he calls it. So this is where you're living a life with purpose. You're excited to get up in the morning. You've got meaning. You've got connection with other people, etc. And then in the middle is all this progression. You know, when you're dirt poor, you don't care where you live, you care what you're going to eat, right? But once what you eat is sorted, you start to think, well, I don't like where I live. There's too much crime, or there's, it's too far away from family. You start to make choices about these things. And then, maybe I don't like my job. I'm going to choose a better job. Well, some people don't have that choice. Further down the hierarchy, they don't get that option. But as you move up the hierarchy, you get more and more choices and more freedom and more fulfillment until you reach this self-actualization. Now, when Daniel Andrews comes along and shuts down the state and divides people into non-essential and essential. Non-essential, you don't matter. Your job doesn't matter. Your company doesn't matter. Your business doesn't matter. You go and sit on a couch at home all day, right? What he's done is he's pushed a bunch of people back down to a survival level. Yep. He's shoved them down the hierarchy of needs, down to that survival level. But at the same time, there's the essential workers, and then there's the laptop workers and the welfare recipients and the government employees who actually their survival is not affected at all. They're making just as much money as before, and maybe even more. Right? But it's worse than that. They have also been given an opportunity to move up the hierarchy of needs by having a level of purpose that they have never enjoyed before.
Right.
By buying into the government's narrative, we're saving grandma, then they suddenly have a sense of purpose and a sense of self-actualization that transcends anything that they've ever had in their mediocre, mundane lives before. This is why we saw not just obedience, but performative obedience. They didn't just want to wear the mask. They were taking selfies of themselves going out in the mask. They didn't just want to get the jab. They were taking selfies of themselves and putting little banners around their Facebook profiles.
Things,
what that was about was saying, guys, I am right up here in this self-actualization mental state, psychological state, because I'm on team save grandma. And that makes me better than you and better than anyone else who isn't on team save grandma. And so now what happens then? You've got this incredible divide in society. It's not the antis and the fours. It's the people who are now struggling with survival in a way that they thought would never happen to them in their life, and other people who are actually living the best fucking life they've ever lived, and they've never felt better, and they've never had more purpose in their life, more of a sense of community in their life. And then you get to the point where a politician has to start winding this stuff backwards, has to start getting rid of vaccine mandates, has to start getting rid of mask mandates and lockdowns and density limits, etc. And there is a portion of society for whom this is not about a practical question of mask mandates, etc. This is actually about their very identity.
Right.
And they don't want this stuff to go away.
Yeah.
Because they know in their heart of hearts that their mediocre existence will never feel as good ever again as what it did for those 2 years while they got to live out the fantasy that they were helping save the world.
Right.
Okay.
And once you understand the psychology, a lot of people start to make a lot more sense.
Okay. I'm going to throw something else in here too. I'm going to say that there's also a level of Stockholm syndrome that is
100%.
That is as part of this.
100%. Yeah. Let me give you an example of how this can work. By the way, I think we should rename it from Stockholm Syndrome to Melbourne Syndrome, because
I agree.
Stockholm Syndrome, what was it? It was a bank robbery or whatever it was, and it was a small number of people in a very specific incident.
This was millions.
This was the whole city, right? The whole city. But I saw an example of it just the other day. I was chatting to some workers at a supermarket up here in Queensland, and they're going to lose their job at the end of the month because they're refusing to take the vaccines. Right. And there used to be quite a lot of them in that particular supermarket refusing. And gradually, one by one, some of them have succumbed and gone, okay, fine, I'll get the jab. They have become the most militant and the most angry against those who are continuing to refuse. And I was chatting with one of the people who is continuing to refuse because they recognized me and they wanted to have a chat. And she said to me that one of her previous friends, colleagues, co-workers had come up to her and said, I hope you lose your job. Because if you don't lose your job, I'm going to be so pissed, because the only reason I got this was to keep my job. And if you get to keep your job anyway, I'm going to be fucking livid.
And the madness is they're getting a jab they don't want that they know isn't good for them for a job they don't want and they know isn't good for them.
But it's the fear. This is the nature of living in fear. Instead of living in a big world full of possibility where you can go boldly and take risks, your world gets shrunk down and you become more afraid about losing what little bit you've got. But you're absolutely right. It's Stockholm Syndrome. And sometimes the people that tried to hold out and couldn't for whatever reason, they judge themselves, they feel guilty, whatever the psychology may be, they become the most vicious and the biggest defender of their captor, so to speak.
So let me ask you another thing, and this has been in my head for so long too. The only people they mandated the jab for, or you don't get your job, get the jab or you don't get the job, the only people they mandated for were effectively the working class. Nurses, teachers. Okay, there's some doctors in there as well.
I wouldn't call them working class. I wouldn't call them working class.
No, you're right. Probably working class is not the thing, but more.
No, they're more the essential workers.
Right, but they're people that don't have the money to lawyer up and get a decision made otherwise. Yeah. The only reason why some police stood up was because the union got behind them. Yeah,
in some places, yes.
Right, and the union had the money.
In Victoria, no.
They didn't mandate office workers. Office workers, everybody knows, anybody who's worked in federal government in Canberra and the offices in the shit state that they are in, as soon as one person walks in with a flu or a cold or something like that, everybody's got it by the end of the week, right? It's just a fact. Yeah. And the air conditioning and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Why didn't they change all the air conditioning in hospitals? It's a bloody hospital for crying out loud. And people went, ICU is not on a separate air conditioner system than the rest of the hospital. So they put all of these people into ICU and stuff, and suddenly it's spreading through the hospital.
Look, there's a lot of things that don't make sense, and there's a lot of decisions that have been made that have been absolutely appalling. Let me throw another one in there that I think is the most criminal out of all of them, and the one that I hope leads to some genuine criminal charges against a few individuals, and that is the banning of early treatment.
Right.
What civilized country denies medicine, even if its effectiveness is disputed? Its safety was not disputed.
No.
Its safety record, I'm not going to say what it is because then you get banned by all the algorithms, but the safety record was not up for debate. 60 years of safe usage for other purposes.
And it won massive prizes and all the rest of it for its incredible
got the Nobel Peace Prize for it.
Right.
And then they turn around and say, doctor, if you prescribe this for the purposes of COVID-19, you will lose your practicing license and you will be criminally charged.
Yeah.
Now, that is such a deeply ethically, morally wrong position to take. And I think, in my opinion, that actually is our best hope of having some individuals charged for a failure of duty of care.
And do you think it will happen, though? Do you think the right people will press the charges?
I don't know the legal system well enough to know the hoops that they would have to jump through in order to get that to stick. If I had to put money on it, I would bet that it won't happen.
Yeah, I would too.
No, I don't think it will either.
Yeah. Talking about illegality, okay, one thing. An article came out after it was busted wide open. Victorian police, thousands, if not 1,000 to 2,000. I can't remember the exact number because I don't think the report actually suggested the exact number. Well over 1,000 Victorian police officers for some time, in fact, for up to 7 years, 2014.
Yeah.
They were not actually technically sworn police officers because of an administration error. So the detail that I read about, the guy who was actually doing the swearing in actually didn't have the authority to do the swearing in, and therefore, technically speaking, under the law, they weren't sworn police officers. The big question is, all those cases that group of unsworn police officers administered, are those cases going to get thrown out?
Well, I don't know. I would be suggesting to everyone that has pending charges or anyone that has a conviction against them to be talking to their lawyer so that the lawyer can submit requests for information and confirmation that the officer involved in that person's case wasn't one of these people. Now, yes, it was just a technicality, okay? However, the law is nothing but technicality.
Everything about the law is technicalities, right?
Law is words on a page, and if you don't follow the words on the page, you have broken the law.
Yep.
When you don't follow the words on the page, when you swear somebody in, they're not sworn in. That's all the law is pure, graceless, unfeeling technicality. That's all it is. And it does feel a little bit delicious that finally we can use a technicality against the government when they so gleefully like to use technicalities against us all the time. I'm for context, I'm charged with 2 counts of incitement, which carries the risk of me having a criminal record, which would mean I could never again travel to the US, something that I've done a half a dozen times in my life, and my work is wrapped up in the US as well. And there'd be a bunch of other countries I wouldn't be able to go to. It may affect if I were to decide to run for politics, which I don't really want to at this point. But you know what? Fast forward 20 years, maybe I do want to.
Sure.
But if I've got a criminal record, right?
Yeah.
And my crime was that I encouraged people to attend protests against the Andrews government.
Right.
Now,
a constitutional right.
Protest is both a constitutional right. It is also a universally recognised human right.
Yep.
It is contained in the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. And yes, the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities lays out a set of circumstances under which those rights may be abrogated for a time, right? So they're not hard and fast, always universal rights. But I defy anyone to argue that the threshold was met. So in the legislation, any limitations on our rights has to be necessary, justified, reasonable, and proportionate.
And some would argue that none of those have been fulfilled because we only had 211 deaths.
Well, okay, let's in the words of what is it, Jen Psaki, the spokeswoman for the White House. Let's circle back to that. But before we do, let me just say, necessary by the very nature of the word, and remember, law is nothing but technicalities and words. So this is what matters. Necessary means there was no other way to achieve an equivalent outcome. Right. If there was another way to achieve an equivalent outcome, then the thing was not necessary.
Yeah, right.
Now, are you telling me that we could not have achieved the same outcome in terms of the health objectives, handling the protests differently? You telling me that there was no other way? It was necessary to handle them the way that they did. I think would fail at that hurdle, let alone the other 3.
Just point out Queensland, point out New South Wales, point out everywhere else where there was a protest and it never went to the level of Victoria.
That's right. And there remains to this day no example of confirmed outdoor transmission of COVID in Australia, not at a protest or anywhere else. It has not been confirmed that has ever happened.
Right, okay. Yeah, thank you. Right. How long have I been saying this, Shane?
Yeah. Lock them up.
They said the Black Lives Matter protest, it's going to be a super spreader event.
Never
no cases.
No.
This protest, that protest, the Canberra protest, every other, there's going to be a super spreader event. No cases.
No.
Yeah.
Outdoor transmission in Australia in our weather conditions is extremely unlikely, maybe impossible. I'm not going to say it is definitely impossible, but we have no confirmed examples of it ever happening. And the idea that it becomes a super spreader event is nonsense. And the idea that it's necessary to be cracking down on protests and making them illegal when you have achieved your goal of COVID zero. Remember, there was no COVID.
Right.
So even if you believe that a protest could be a super spreader event, how do you get a super spreader event when there's no COVID in the state in the first place? Yeah. None of this makes sense, and none of it holds up to the very simple 4 standards. A restriction on our rights given under the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities has to be necessary, proportionate, justified, and the other one.
Right. Yeah. So just in wrapping things up, let's quickly look at, we've got an election coming up. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, firstly, right, the Prime Minister, God bless his cotton socks,
the guy who doesn't hold a hose,
did absolutely fuck all during the whole 2 years and allowed every single state premier to run their own show. So I would say that there has been
you're giving him way too much credit.
Sorry, I forgot. That would actually involve thinking, wouldn't it? Yeah.
He did worse than fuck all.
Yeah.
Okay, he did far worse. He baited the state premiers into vaccine mandates.
Yeah.
When asked about it, he said, oh, well, the federal government doesn't have the power to do that, which is true.
Yes.
But he then says, but I was the architect of no jab, no play. So I think you know where I stand on that, right? The premiers understand exactly what he's saying. I can't do it, but I support it. I'm the one who came up with it in the first place, in fact. He locked Australian passport holders out of Australia.
Yeah.
If this isn't a failure in duty of care, if this isn't a failure, a breach of the unspoken contract between citizens and the government that they pay their taxes to and owe their allegiance to, then I don't know what is. You're an Australian, you hold an Australian passport, and you're not allowed to come into Australia.
Right.
That's unheard of. And
just to remind everybody listening, the only reason why COVID is even here is because of a failure in the federal government managing their borders properly. They told us that they'd locked the borders, yet they still allowed 46,000 people to come and go every single month.
Yeah. Now, let me say, the virus was always going to get here.
Of course,
right? And the failure was not that it got in. The failure was that they acted as though they could keep it out, and they caused so much harm and so much damage in this fantasy that they could keep it out.
Yeah. Right. So with the election coming up, I mean, there's probably a lot of people that are going, well, we don't want Scott Morrison to get back in, but look at the alternative. You've been very public on your website as to how we should vote.
Yeah, 100%.
So how should we vote?
Okay, it's very simple. If you want to go deep, then you need to go onto my Facebook page or YouTube channel and find my how preferential voting works using marbles video. I explain the technicality of how preferential voting works. If you want to do that, go and do that. I'm not going to do a deep explanation here. What I'm going to do is the practical, superficial explanation that just tells you what you need to do. Here's the thing. Take whoever the MP is that is in right now. They might be Labor, they might be Nationals, they might be Greens, they might be Liberal. Whoever they are, put them at the very bottom. Then, second from the bottom, put the other major party and put the Greens and put the Nationals, working your way up from the bottom. When I say the bottom, your ballot, there'll be a bunch of boxes and you might have 9 boxes and you have to number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Yep.
Okay? So the incumbent, whoever's got the job right now, they become number 9.
Yep.
And the other major party becomes number 8. And then the next major party becomes number 7 and number 6. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 become whichever freedom-friendly minor parties you have in your electorate.
Independents, whatever. Yep.
Yeah.
Not quite, because many independents are very hard left, and I don't necessarily want to be supporting them, okay? Right. So let me be specific. There's 6 that I would keep an eye out for. Now, there are more, but there are 6. I personally am a financial member of the Liberal Democrats, not the Liberal Party. Totally different thing. Yeah. If you're in Victoria, think David Limbrick and Tim Quilty. Okay. If you're in New South Wales, think David Leyonhjelm from federal parliament a little while ago. If you're in Queensland, Campbell Newman is now their lead Senate candidate as the Liberal Democratic lead Senate candidate there. So I'm a member of theirs, and I will be voting number 1 for the Liberal Democrats. I will then be voting number 2 for the United Australia Party, number 3 for One Nation, and then whoever else has a candidate. So these are guys like GAP, A1, IMOP, and there's a whole bunch of them, right? But if you put those 3 at the top, Liberal Democrats, UAP, One Nation, and then the others next, and the major parties at the bottom, then because of our preferential voting system, which, like I said, if you want to understand it, you've got to go and watch that video, you've maximized the worth and the usefulness of your vote by doing that. Right. Major parties at the bottom, freedom-friendly parties at the top, everyone else in the middle.
This is the exact problem I had in the last election.
Is Green considered a major party?
So when I say major party, what I mean is Liberal and Nationals, because I see them as they're a coalition.
Yeah.
Labor and Greens, because let's be honest, they're just a coalition.
Yeah, okay.
Right. They are the major parties as far as I'm concerned.
Interesting, very interesting. So what's next for you, Topher, and where can people take a viewing of your incredible documentary?
Sure. I'll answer the second one first because it's easy. So Battleground Melbourne is the name of the documentary, battlegroundmelbourne.com.
Yep.
You can also find it on YouTube, on Facebook, on Rumble, on other ones as well. I'm sure it's been put up in lots of them. If you do watch on YouTube, make sure you're watching the one that says official 4K. The original version that was put out the night that it was released, it was in 1080p, so not in as high resolution, but also the audio mix wasn't quite right. We made a few mistakes there, so we corrected that and we re-released it. So the family and friends one has audio issues. It's still watchable, but it has audio issues. Yep. The official 4K is the one where everything is exactly how I want it to be.
Yep.
And we also took the opportunity to update a few things as well in that one. So that's the one you want to be watching, the official one. So battlegroundmelbourne.com, the official one is embedded in the homepage, otherwise Facebook, YouTube, etc. What's next for me? I ask myself that question on a very regular basis because contrary to what a lot of people think, this whole Topher thing isn't actually kind of what I do. I'm a stay-at-home dad. I have 2 businesses that I run from home with a laptop and emails and phone calls and everything else, whilst looking after kids and doing the grocery shopping and doing most of the cooking. And I do this Topher stuff as well. So, you know, in the great words of the Joker from Batman, do I look like a man with a plan? I don't know what I'm doing next. I don't know what I'm doing.
Good answer.
Well, often then the best things will probably find you.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I have a motto. I do the thing that is in front of me.
Yeah.
And at some point in time, something is going to come in front of me and I'm going to go, ooh, actually, yes, I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, look, keep up the work on your website as well, because, you know, the videos are great. The interviews you're doing are great. And the movie, fantastic. Battleground Melbourne.
Oh, fabulous.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
I appreciate
and for anybody who hasn't seen it, just don't waste any more time. Just get in there and see it. It'll really will open your eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Topher Field, thank you so much for joining us on The Bad Boys.
I appreciate it very much, guys. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
This is the Bad Boys Podcast. Well, that was Topher Field, and great conversation. A little bit deeper than what we usually go on the show.
Yeah, look, I got to say, first of all, what a great guy. Good on him for sticking his neck out and having a go at this. Yeah. He obviously knows his stuff. It's nice talking to people who really know their subject and know it very passionately. And look, I implore anybody who hasn't seen Battleground Melbourne, really get in there and have a listen to it, watch it. It is staggering. Yeah. Yeah. Like it literally is absolutely staggering what was going on and stuff. I thought I knew it all. I thought I'd been right on top of it all because I was watching it on Facebook and on the news and all the rest of it. I didn't even know half of it. No. And this documentary, Battleground Melbourne, really clears that up.
Yeah, it does. It does. So we will have in the description on the podcast, the links to Battleground Melbourne are actually in there. You can just click on those links and watch the documentary. Great job. I mean, wow. Put together a documentary. I think he started in October. He was crowdfunding it. You know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Look, he's done a great job. And to be right in there on the weeds and stuff like that, you know, I really admire people who stand up for what they believe in, even if it's not what I believe in. Like what he has presented, you know, I support him and I see his viewpoint and I agree with his viewpoint. Yeah. But I don't necessarily agree with everybody's viewpoint, but I do agree with their right and have, you know, respect their right to believe what they want to believe. Yeah. Even if it's kind of fucking crazy, that's fine, whatever. Yeah. It's their life. They can believe whatever they want. I don't have to believe it.
Exactly. So head over to Official Bad Boys Podcast on Facebook and Instagram.
And of course, if you just want to chill out with some bloody great music without the bullshit, tune into Bad Boys FM, music with lots and lots of attitude.
And where's that?
Yeah, at badboysfm.com. Badboysfm.com. Badboysfm.com.
Right. After all this time that you'd get it right. Seriously.
I thought I had it right too. I'm looking at you thinking, what the
fuck? Thanks, guys. Press plus or follow to hear more great episodes from the Bad Boys. Or check us out on our social media at Official Bad Boys Podcast on both Facebook and Instagram.